For those of you that don't know me, I think you all do. I'm Jim Martin Schramm, a policy analyst for the Clean Energy Districts of Iowa. This is our second in a three-part series right now on data centers in Iowa. I gave an overview of CEDI's new webpage on data centers and resources for concerned citizens last about 2 weeks ago. Today we have John ZAKRASEK talking about the hyperscale data centers being built in Linn County. And in 2 weeks we will have Brian Crambier from My Energy talking about the possibility of a data center, a small one, in Harmony, Minnesota, connected to the My Energy REC territory. So stay tuned for more information about that. But it's my pleasure today to introduce to you our speaker, John ZAKRASEK, who is the director of the Linn County or Linn Clean Energy District in Linn County. John is a founding member and the director of Linn Clean Energy District, a board member of the Clean Energy Districts of Iowa, and a board member of the Iowa Blue-Green Alliance. He participated in the creation of the climate resolutions adopted by Cedar Rapids and Linn County in 2019, served on the committee that assisted in the development of the Cedar Rapids Climate Action Plan, is co-chair of the Linn County Sustainability and Advisory Committee that developed the 2019 Linn County Greenhouse Gas Inventory, and participated in the development of the East Central Iowa Council of Governments Pathway Plan, which is a climate action plan for 6 counties. John supported the Duane Arnold and Cogan solar projects, I'm not sure I pronounced Cogan right, and brought together community leaders who supported and opposed the projects to eliminate misinformation and to enable a viable and balanced decision by the county supervisors. John has also participated in the enhancement of Linn County's solar ordinance and the development of Linn County ordinances covering wind, nuclear, data centers, and gas power plants. So, John, thank you for being willing to give this webinar. You have enormous expertise and background, and this stuff is taking place in your backyard. So we'll turn it over to you and look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you for that introduction, Jim, and good to see everyone. So, what I'd like to cover is how these data centers are impacting electricity, water, natural gas, and carbon emissions in Linn County, Iowa. So, the first thing I want to cover is how big are these, what land are they using, capacity of these, and so on. So, right now in Cedar Rapids, we've got 12 of these data centers planned, and that's about 1,000 acres of land. QTS has 3 data centers currently under construction, and then got 4 additional buildings planned. And then Google's got 1 data center under construction with 4 more planned. Then out at Palo, which is where the Duane Arnold Nuclear Center is, there's 6 planned facilities. So they've got a 545-acre campus, and they've signed a power purchase agreement with NextEra to restart the 615 megawatt nuclear power plant. And that, of course, has to be approved by the NRC. And the power agreement they have, they're going to get 92% of the power. And then SIPCO, which previously owned some of the Duane Arnold Energy Center, is going to get the remaining 8%, which is 50 megawatts. So the scale of these is unprecedented. Anybody who hasn't come to Cedar Rapids, you need to come and drive down 76th, and you just won't believe what you see because these are so massive. Just one QTS data center covers 1.2 million square feet. That's the equivalent of covering 28 acres with a massive building that's going to be filled with electronics. So that building can house over 100,000 of the big AI chips, the GPUs, and there'd be tens of thousands of additional computer processing units. And right now, it depends on who you talk to, but there are as many as 8,500 active construction workers out there. Just driving along 76, you'll come by about 12 to 15 people, and all they're doing is allowing traffic in and out of the construction site. And you can just see from this picture, the disruption to the ground is such that it will never be able to grow anything again. The amount of grading, and soil removal is unbelievable. So this next topic here is the most important from my perspective, because until I really understood this, I did not really know how these data centers were likely to affect things here in Linn County. So these data centers, they operate around the clock. Many of them are going to have 99.999% service level agreements with the people that use those data centers, the big companies. And that one QTS facility, and by the way, this is what QTS actually says in public comments, 180 megawatts of consumption around the clock. That's 1.57 billion kilowatt hours. And so, to help you understand how big that is, just two of those facilities would consume the same amount of electricity as all the residents, all the commercial, and all the industrial sites in Linn County in 2023. So, I mean, just think about that. It's as though our population is doubling. And then if you look at all 18 planned data centers, it would be a 4.8 fold increase. So that would be like increasing our 233,000 population and all the businesses and so on that are associated with it up by 1.1 million. So this is something completely and utterly unprecedented and is going to take energy well beyond anything we've ever seen. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the effects of that too. So lots of people are concerned about water. And while that's an issue, it's not as big an issue as the electricity consumption, in my opinion. So the first thing to know is QTS, all their data centers use closed loop cooling. So if it's less than 55 degrees outside, they don't need anything. They just get air cooling. Now they do need pumps. They've got to pump that cooling fluid out into their radiators so that it can go ahead and air cool and then pump it back in. But then when they get above 55 and up to 70, they use both air cooling and then chillers. Above 70, it's all chiller. And this is where they really start to consume additional electricity. That can be 10 to 30% more than they're already drawing. Now, Google, they like to use evaporative cooling because then they don't have to use as much energy.
Uh-oh. John is frozen for me. Is he frozen for the rest of you?
Correct. Yes,
Uh-oh.
John, you were frozen
Yep,
for about
Oh,
frozen
there he
here.
is. Now he's
20
back.
seconds.
Am I unfrozen?
Yep.
It says my internet connection is unstable, and I do not know why. It's usually pretty good.
Yeah.
All right. So can you hear me now?
Correct.
Yep. It's interesting that it happened just when you started talking about Google.
Yeah. I'll have to go see if AI is listening to me. Okay, so Cedar Rapids facility between 200,000 and 1 million gallons of water daily. And as you would expect, it depends on how hot it is outside. You're going to have to use more water the hotter it is outside. The Palo campus, when it's really hot, 12 million gallons of water during the hot summer days. So let's just take a look so you guys can get a feel. I don't think water is as big an issue. It's still an issue, especially if they're going to be draining some of the aquifers. But in Linn County, we use about 60 million gallons of water every day. Now, we have a lot of industrial sites that use huge amounts of water, and our city supplies them. And so you can see when it's really hot and it's dry and people start watering their lawns, it's about 13 to 17 million gallons more per day. And then it helps to know the Cedar River, even when it was in its worst drought condition, way, way back, it was down in the 30s, I think, 223 million gallons flowed through it daily. And during the 2012 drought here, the river dropped to 21% of its average flow. And some of the horizontal collector wells that the city uses, they fell 36 feet. So that hurt things because they couldn't pump as much water out as they typically do. And then we have the Jordan Aquifer. It's dropped a considerable amount over the last century. If it gets used more, it will continue to drop, and there will be wells that go dry. Decades ago, they pumped out of the Silurian Devonian aquifer, and it dropped by 100 feet. And then they stopped. And when they saw they were really impeding it, and they shifted to these alluvial well fields. They're just on the sides of the river. So I wanted you to see what happened when Linn County decided to get very aggressive and make sure that water was not going to be abused in Linn County. So they required Google, this was in discussions as the ordinance was being constructed in Linn County, to provide $500,000 for a comprehensive water study. That would be streams and aquifers, what was historically happening, what are the current and projected demands, and how is that going to work given potential drought conditions and so on. So it also had a water use agreement. And under that water use agreement, Google would have to tell the county on a regular basis, monthly, how much water they're consuming. So that could be monitored. And they had to provide contingency plans in case there were droughts. Well, Google decided they didn't like this. So they went to the city of Palo and said, why don't you annex the land where we'll build these data centers? And let's do it under an ordinance that you put together. So Palo copied some of Linn County's ordinance and pulled out some of the things Google didn't want. And now they're facing very severe objections from the citizens, and they put a hold on further public meetings. They've had their first public hearing, and we'll see what happens from here forward. And then this is another thing that needs to be understood by people. So to provide all this electricity, we already have a proposed 720 megawatt gas-fired power plant in Linn County. This has been proposed to the Iowa Utility Commission. Linn County does not yet have an application in front of it, but I want you to see what's going to happen. They're going to run this plant at really high rates, 45% capacity factor. That's not typical. Usually these plants are running in the 10 to 15% range as peaker plants. And this is a single cycle plant, which is what peaker plants typically are. So you can see in 2023, all of Linn County, again, all of Linn County, so this is residential, commercial, industrial, consumed 24.6 billion cubic feet of natural gas. This Morgan Valley gas plant, if it's running at its full capacity factor of 45%, will consume 33.2 billion cubic feet. So it's a 135% increase, more than doubling the amount of natural gas being used here in Linn County. So you can see it's the electricity and the natural gas impacts here that are so massive compared to the water usage, which is not as massive. All right. So I've worked hard on climate change here in Cedar Rapids and Linn County. And Linn County and Cedar Rapids both have committed, they have resolutions that they adopted. The city council voted for them, the supervisors voted for them, and they wanted to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 45% by 2030 relative to 2010 levels. And they want to get to net zero by 2050. QTS, they want to use 100% renewable energy by 2025, last year. Google, they want 24 by 7 carbon-free energy by 2030. That's when the gas-fired power plants would be built and online. So, how's that going to work for them? So here's the progress we've made, and it's been hard to get these numbers pulled together accurately because we pulled out a greenhouse gas inventory for Linn County, but then that transitioned to East Central Iowa Council of Governments, who used some consultants who had a different approach to the way they measured greenhouse gases. But close as we can get, there was about an 18% reduction since 2010 in our emissions. A lot of that was from solar and wind. A lot of that was from converting coal-fired plants here in Linn County to natural gas. And we need another 27% to hit our 2030 target, which is just around the corner, right? So here comes this power plant when we're trying to get our emissions down to 45%, and it's going to pop them up by 28%, increasing our emissions of CO2e. And so we're going to be 55% off course. What a mess, right? We worked so hard, and now the emissions are going to go off the map, and our grandchildren will be suffering from what's happening here and from other places. So we have to try to deal with it here, just like everyone else needs to deal with it where they live. So most people don't know about this, but the EPA spent years and did this internationally. They wanted to assess if we had a dollar figure for every metric ton of carbon emissions how much damage do those cause over the years ahead? Because as you all know, carbon emissions create cumulative damages, right? It's like a blanket, and then you add another layer of carbon and emissions, and it's another blanket. Or it's like being out in the sun in a car, and every bit of emissions rolls the windows up a little higher so it gets hotter inside that car parked in the sun. And there have been arguments about what discount rate should we use? Should we use a 2% rate? Because after all, it's serious business to us if our children and grandchildren have to suffer in the years ahead. Or should we use a 7% discount rate? Because those damages out in the future aren't as important as what we do today. So you can see the range of damage here. And by the way, these are primarily based on the number of people that die as a result of things like heat and cold exposure. This is the amount of crop reduction there is as a result of damage from the environmental changes that are going to occur. And they did not take into account with excessive methods that weather effects, because so many people say, well, the weather's always had tough effects, right? Hurricanes, tornadoes. So they didn't really push on that. They went straight to what are the direct impacts on humans, and how about things like our agriculture, where we're going to be affecting our food. And then they also took into account a few other things like laborers not being able to work as much because it's so dang hot outside, you can't stand the heat. Okay, so this is just for the 720 megawatt gas-fired power plant. You can see the damages are between 112 and $344 million every year. Is that what we want to do? Put a plant in that has these kinds of damages? All right. So why are these plants all these data centers all coming into Cedar Rapids and Linn County and Iowa? Well, first of all, Iowa has some wonderful incentives for them. They have sales tax and property tax that they've eliminated for some of these data centers. And then in Cedar Rapids, look what they did: 20 years at 70% tax rebates granted by Cedar Rapids. So just in phase one for QTS, that's 1 billion in total property taxes they expected to be generated in the next 20 years, and they're going to give 520 million back to QTS. And then the franchise fee, this is very interesting. We have a 4% franchise fee. That's assigned to every dollar of electricity that they pay for. And so the QTS 180 megawatt building, they'll get $3.1 million back, assuming they're consuming the full amount of 180 megawatts around the clock for a full year. And that's at 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour. How much are you paying for your electricity per kilowatt hour? If you're in Alliance service territory, it's between 17 and 18 cents a kilowatt hour. So this is at 6.5 cents, assuming they got some great deal, which they typically do for these big consumption. And so that'd be 20.5 million saved annually across all 12 data centers. That's how much they're getting back. And Cedar Rapids was very excited that each building is actually going to pay them 300,000 each year instead of then you look at this 20.5 million that they're giving back to them. So one of the things that was asked of the city of Cedar Rapids, we said, hey, the city of Cedar Rapids, Linn County all have climate reduction goals. So does QTS, so does Google. So instead of giving back that 75% rebate on their electricity prices, keep it if they're not using zero carbon energy instead of fossil fuel gas plants. And they've heard that, but they haven't been doing anything about it yet. I plan to go and ask them another couple, 3 times to do that, because I think that that makes sense when all of these people have the same goal to reduce emissions. If they can't get them to use emission-free energy, then take the 75% fee rebate, give it to groups that will reduce emissions in other ways. Maybe we could use it as incentives to get the ADM that still has a coal-fired power plant to get rid of that plant and use renewable energy and some of the new techniques to produce heat for those big plants. All right. So here are things. We'll open this up for questions and discussions. But first thing that anybody that's in any county needs to do is you better make sure you've got an ordinance in place to deal with data centers. If you don't, good luck. And you better have an understanding of whether you're going to allow them to get big tax rebates, property tax, franchise fee, whatever it happens to be. And then we need to get these high load tariffs in place so data centers exclusively bear all the electric expansion and consumption costs and use only clean energy. Those are being done in other states, and we need to make sure it's happening here. And then we better make sure, what if a data center goes bankrupt? What if they close? What if they cause utility cost increases to the rest of us? We need to cover that all in these high load tariffs. And then this is happening in other states. They're requiring data centers to interrupt performance of their data centers, to shut them down when peak loads are there that could affect the grid. That will help us immensely in not having to have these massive peaker plants in place. And then water studies, I think, are very good, along with water consumption reports. And then we're going to have to deal with siting if we want to get the number of renewables in place. And we're going to have transmission siting advancing much more rapidly than it has in the past. Sometimes these transmission lines take 10 years to put in place. We're never going to get the clean energy in place to drive these data centers if we don't have some siting advantages. So that's the end of my presentation. So I'll open it up now for discussion and questions.
Thanks so much, John. Really, so much content, and I know there's so much more that you could present. While folks are thinking about questions to ask, there were a couple that came in while you were talking. So one from Jeremy Karen. Are there any statistics on what percentage of the construction workforce is local versus migratory for these different projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, we've got license plates from all over the place, including Canada. And there are a lot of people that what they'll say is the people that are out there working at the data centers that are local would have been doing other projects. We're having difficulty now getting projects besides the data centers actually done. But what I would say is it's probably the first 600 to 1,000 were local. And then after that, they're from all over the place, out of state. So, the 4,500 to 8,500, what does that put you at? Like 10% of them are from here, the rest of them from out of state.
Yeah, the vast majority. Okay.
And it has exhausted all our rentals. Hotels are filled up. Now, if you go out there, you'll see buses. The buses are bringing workers, they're taking workers to other places where they can live or go to sleep for a while. Anyway, it's a lot of outside of the state workers.
I think I saw somewhere, John, that campgrounds near Cedar Rapids are entirely full. That some folks are living there. Christine Copperwood asked a question: what leverage does the county have to enforce the climate targets that they approved earlier?
So these, as you can expect, while those were passed, the level of attention to them has been reduced over the last many years here. There hasn't been the kind of attention needed. So there's been a lot of effort on the parts of some members of the community to try to move this forward and really get some good project plans in place with accountability for achieving the results that we need to. So, for example, the Cedar Rapids Climate Action Plan, when I participated on the committee that put that together, the biggest issue was, okay, how are we going to make sure we get the correct number of things done so we can get the emissions down? So that means, how do we reduce the number of miles people drive with gas cars? How do we increase the number of electric cars instead of gas cars? How do we increase home energy efficiency? How do we change building codes so that homes are built with all electric and high efficiency mechanisms? None of those things that quantified how many of those you had to do each year made it into the climate action plan. So they ended up being much more focused on sustainability measures and much less focused on the fact that, hey, we need to go ahead and make 5,000 homes a year 100% energy, 100% emissions free, convert them over to electricity and make sure the electricity is 100% green. We need to talk to all the industry and make sure they're moving at a correct pace so that by 2030 they've got 45% reductions, and by 2050 there's zero. So it's been extremely difficult to do. From some of the big industrial companies like Archer Daniels Midland, we attempted to go and engage with them and get commitments from them to move forward and get the emissions down. And we immediately encountered all sorts of resistance. The supervisor was not willing to bring them in and let us talk to them. This is the
Mm,
advisory committee. And we were even trying to use a model that was implemented in other states where you get all your industrial companies together and talk about things that are beneficial to the community. That could include climate change. So there's a lot of work to be done to create the accountability that's really necessary to make those resolutions truly enforceable.
sure. Um, Andy asked, with regard to the workers, what proportion of them or percentage of them are union, do you think?
It's a high percentage. Our local IVEW says that their workers are now making $300,000 a year.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't know, and that's everything. That's their wages, the benefits, the whole nine yards.
right,
So
right.
the union workers are very excited. I had a friend, I have a friend in Rotary who working out there, and all his workers are union. So I don't know if that's true across the board. I would expect some of the workers out there are not union, but the ones I
Mm-hmm,
know are.
mm-hmm. Uwe Rudolph asks, could John say more about which states are successfully dealing with data centers and to what degree?
Well, I think we're at 26 that are pushing back on them as hard as they possibly can. I think that was the number I saw some time ago. What's happening here is this is accelerating the objections to data centers because now it's becoming more widely known exactly how monstrous they are and the impacts they can have locally. So I haven't done comprehensive research there, I can only mention that I know there's enough happening that we we keep hearing about more data centers coming here in Linn County, more than are currently planned.
Yeah,
So it must
and
be working pretty well in some other states, and we're still wide open. We give you the tax breaks, we got the water, we'll give you the electricity. Here you come.
well, and I mentioned during my webinar 2 weeks ago that a QTS data center in Wisconsin got pushed out of Wisconsin, and they are hooking up here in Iowa through Alliant. And my understanding was it was supposed to be a little more than half the size of the facility that's being built in Cedar Rapids. And then I heard that Clinton, Iowa is grappling with a QTS facility, which, according to their mayor, is actually supposed to be bigger than the facility scheduled for Cedar Rapids, which makes me wonder then, well, is that the facility that was in Wisconsin coming over, or is that one, the 370, where's that going? And so, anyway, yeah, there's a real potential here for just sort of endless growth in the state of Iowa if we don't get a handle on it the way some other states are. If you have an ability to open the chat, you may want to look at Ben Davison's discussion. John was talking about water consumption for cooling of the data centers, but Ben is reminding us that a lot of water is used to cool the power plants that generate the electricity. If this were a coal-fired power plant, it'd be a huge amount of water, but even for a natural gas facility, it's a significant amount of water, and you can see in the chat how much he is projecting. John, I don't know if you want to comment about that. And
Yeah. What I can tell you is that I was surprised at how low the water consumption is for the single cycle plants.
mm,
So, well, it's still a reasonable amount. Um, I actually ran the calculation. I know I sent it over to Mark. Mark, do you remember what it was? Because we took it straight out of the application by IPL to the Iowa Utilities Commission. They gave an exact number of gallons of water consumed per hour of operation. So we were able to calculate the exact amount per year. Um, let's see what you got there. So you're showing 3.6 million gallons of water per day. And that seems much higher than the numbers that we saw in the application. That'll be something we'll want to make sure is accurate. And by the way, the combined cycle plants, my understanding is they do consume a considerably larger amount of water. So we'll check on that, Ben, and we'll send it back out to everybody since I don't have that in my brain right now. But it was a smaller amount than I thought.
John. So
Yeah,
with
go
a
for it.
combined cycle, they make steam, right? With a single cycle, they don't make steam.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, so John's turned off the sharing of screens, and so now if you would like to ask a question, just maybe turn on your camera or raise your hand and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question directly to John. Don't be shy.
So, and it's
Amy.
okay for you to go ahead and pull up your artificial intelligence and say, what questions should I ask about data centers?
Amy's got a
That's what the
question.
legislators did when the data center owners came to talk to them. They said, well, I just want you to know I used AI to determine what questions to ask you. And it said to do this.
So I'll
John?
I'll just repeat the question I put in the chat since you
Yeah, I just
invited.
saw it.
If we and everyone else don't want data centers near us, are we effectively asking our legislators to outlaw AI? Or to rephrase the question, where do we think we should put data centers?
Uh, the reason you're not hearing me say much there is because I don't know how you stop something like this. I think there was a book about what's happening. It was written by an individual who's been engaged since social media took off, and then he was engaged as AI was taking off. And interestingly, even though he was extraordinarily opposed, he said the chance that we're going to be able to stop artificial intelligence is almost it's non-existent. There's too much momentum, there's too much money, and he didn't see any way that that could happen. And then as far as where we should be building data centers, they want them to be locally available so that they can serve the populations in each area. I would say I don't have an answer.
So is the answer to say, okay, we'll allow you to build the data center, and we, speaking on behalf of all the cities and counties that just had immense amounts of tax money taken away from them, we'll take the taxes and support other things that our city and county residents want to do, but here are the restrictions. In other words, we're all talking about this as if they're terrible, and like you say, I don't think we can stop them. So how do we be intelligent and about regulating them?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think Linn County did an outstanding job on their data center ordinance. It's, they studied what was happening in Virginia, where they had a history of the data centers and really understood the impacts that they had on their communities. So anyone who's going to have a data center in their county, first place I'd send you to look is the Linn County ordinance. I think they really did try to do an outstanding job. The one thing I recommended that they did not put in that ordinance was doing a study on electricity, and just as they did on water, and require them to be reporting on electricity consumption, in a similar fashion, and all the effects it would have on gas prices, on emissions, on everything, water usage, and so on. Um, I think if that was also included so that you could truly protect the citizens, that would be a good thing. Kristen?
Um, I think, yeah, okay, maybe Uwe, you took your hand down. Kristen, let me just say that CEDI's Data Center Resource Hub, I'll put the link in the chat. Our primary goal there is to share best practices from other states and to share, provide access to the language of the ordinance in Linn County, but in other counties as well. So just be aware that that tool is out there and we keep updating it. Christina and I update it weekly. Kristen, again?
John, thanks so much for this presentation. It was really educational and enlightening and terrifying and all of those things. I'm really interested in the zero emissions commitment, or you know uh walking up to that commitment, maybe even if it's not committed right away. And I'm wondering, and forgive me if I missed this, is nuclear considered a clean energy source, as they're talking about 100% clean energy? And was reigniting the Duane Arnold part of that strategy?
Yes, nuclear plants obviously produce nuclear waste, and there are emissions associated with mining and refining uranium. But as far as producing electricity in Linn County, those nuclear plants have zero with respect to heat trapping emissions, greenhouse gases. So they are considered clean from that perspective. And that's why Google is restarting the plant. Just to give you a sense of it, Alliant Energy got the Iowa Utilities Commission to allow them to charge the utility customers $170 million in order to withdraw themselves from a power purchase agreement they had for the nuclear plant. Shortly thereafter, it shut down. And they said the reason was that was going to save an enormous amount of money for consumers because it's so expensive to run the nuclear plant. So here comes Google, and they're willing to pay an additional amount for each kilowatt hour of electricity because it's clean energy, it's carbon free. I mean, that's what their goal is. So my hat's off to Google that they actually tried to go down that path, because it's going to have much less of an impact on emissions in our county.
John?
And by the way, I have to brag on my son. The reason Google has those carbon free goals was when he was in charge of all the sustainability and emissions reductions at Google, and he got the CEO and his team to agree to use carbon free energy going forward. And it was interesting. The day that they went and asked for that to be done, they had a massive fire in California. So it added to the incentive to do that. And they've continued to everywhere they go.
John, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, this is Don from Mason City. And as you know, Alliant is building that huge peaker plant, or planning on building that huge peaker plant at close to Emory, right outside of Mason City. I've been reading about what Minnesota has been trying to do, especially with peaker plants. And they're talking about doing some, example, work in terms of putting solar storage at the end of the line, at the distribution end, to hold the excess electricity needed to meet peak demand, rather than building peaker plants at the beginning of the system. That would shift away from natural gas to battery storage. Number one. Number two, it would make the current transmission lines able to handle a lot more base load electricity. Have you got any seen anything on that? I know there's a big fight for a while in Minnesota, and it was I can't remember the name of the utility, the big utility in Minnesota that was behind it.
Yep. Thanks for passing along that good educational information, Don. That's certainly a viable approach. And it's one of the things that I hope will be considered as we look at alternatives to these gas-fired plants in Iowa. It's certainly one of the things I plan to bring up if I'm allowed to be an intervener in the 720 megawatt plant.
Uva, you have a question?
Yes, first of all, peaker plants, I'm not familiar with that term. Uh, if you could explain that a little more.
It's pretty simple. So here comes a super hot day. The wind, the solar, the existing generation is not providing enough energy for all our air conditioners. So they turn on the peaker plant and they can start it up in 15 minutes. And then we all have enough energy so that our air conditioners will run through that very hot day.
And what's
And
powering
then
those plants?
natural gas.
Oh, okay. I've always
Yep.
argued that nuclear is the only way we're going to save ourselves because everyone is concerned about the waste. But if you have some nuclear waste already in one spot, how does that increase the problem by adding a little more? I have a trouble understanding that. I know that nuclear takes a long time to build, but and you also do have a little bit of effluent heat in the river or wherever it flows out. But I don't know if you'd care to comment on. And thank you also, by the way, for this really extensive dissertation on what's going on. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And as far as the nuclear plants are concerned, some of these fourth generation nuclear plants that are being proposed could actually take the nuclear waste and reduce it so that it has a half-life of 100 years instead of 10,000 years. So there are some possibilities there. As you say, they take a longer time to build. Most people are aware they cost a lot more. One of the biggest issues with the cost is these nuclear plants all got built independently. So here they go. They
John's being censored again.
Yeah. Uh, shoot. No, last time we just waited a little bit and he came back on.
If he turns off his video, it might help his connection.
Yeah.
No
Christine,
problem.
can you message him directly?
And meanwhile, Jim, maybe you want to explain just a teeny bit more about the difference between simple and combined cycle plants and why the simples are peakers and what the utilities are trying to do in their GCUs, because it's a really interesting situation we're in.
I think we have John back now. So, John, do you need the question posed to you again? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
John, you're on mute.
Go ahead and repeat your question, please.
Can't remember who asked the question. Was it you, Uva? Oh, you're on mute, Uva.
It was Andrew Johnson. What was your
He was asking me about single cycle versus combined cycle, but I think you had a question about nuclear, and John was trying to answer that, or am I not remembering that correctly?
No, that was the last thing I was talking about, and it was just mentioning that these modular units are designed so that they don't end up being so darn costly like these old plants were. But that hasn't, there's nothing out there that has demonstrated they're going to be less expensive. Right now, they'd be very, very high cost and take a long time to build. So we'll see where it goes.
We try to keep these to 45 minutes, so I think, Mark, we're going to let you have the last question here.
So the question I wanted to ask is about the fact that when these data centers detect that they're not supplying quality power from the grid, they can shut that off, that grid connection, and draw upon their own power and backup reserves. And when it happens, they can then shut it or turn it right back on as soon as they discover that it's okay again. But these power plants are going to draw such enormous amounts of power. If you switch it off, and it's like doubling our county, and you switch it back on. So what does that do to the grid when you've done that? And my question for you is that being discussed at all?
I'm going to let Paul answer what he learned about. I was astounded when he went to a training or educational conference, and they were talking about the effects that these data centers are likely to have on the grid. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I was at Iowa State for their electric power conference, and there's quite a few sessions that focused on data centers and some of the challenges they provide for grid stability. One of them, especially with data centers that have AI modeling, they can have rapid ramp up of energy demands and then drops in a short period of time. So rather than a steady line that you might have with crypto mining or just data storage with AI, the power fluctuates rapidly, and that can produce oscillations in the grid that actually can result in mechanical oscillations that can damage turbines. And so they're able to do modeling to determine how much problem they'll have with oscillations. And one of the things that they're looking at to help dampen oscillation is using grid forming batteries and grid forming inverters that actually dampen oscillations. And so the engineers, they were talking a lot about actually what they call islanding power to the data centers, and then using these grid forming batteries and inverters then to kind of dampen and, I guess, prevent the problems from going into the grid. But yes, there's a lot of problems with this. And I know Iowa State engineers are on this because they are doing a lot of research on modeling to determine how much problem they'll have with this.
Thanks, Paul.
My brother-in-law's dog is trying to contribute to the conversation. She's a husky German Shepherd mix, and she's just sort of murmuring all the time. It's very sweet. Andy, do you want to, John, thank you for sharing your expertise and your knowledge and your hard-earned wisdom with us today. Hopefully we'll have another opportunity to learn with you and from you. Andy, do you want to say a little bit? I said a bit at the outset about the next session with Brian Crambier, but do you want to say something?
Sure. I'll mention it real briefly, and also just want to point everyone to the chat. Jeremy has put a couple of really interesting things in about curtailment and what the feds are thinking when it comes to data centers, because this is a really big jurisdictional issue, right? Who has the right to curtail data centers or tell them they must be curtailed? And transmission system operators are getting heavily into that game for sure. It's interesting, like a county wouldn't necessarily, we talked about this briefly before, have the authority to curtail data centers, but once the data centers start putting generation behind their fence and they're not on the transmission system, then locals have more authority. So it's just an interesting, anyway, Jeremy's got some interesting stuff here in the chats, follow those links. So for in a couple weeks, jumping ahead, Brian Crambier has been manager, CEO of My Energy, the local co-op here, which is Dairyland's largest, I believe, by customers co-op. It's an Iowa, Minnesota co-op. We've known and worked with Brian since the beginning of the Linn Energy District, actually in the early days, around 2010, 11, 12. The co-op has kept the doors open to customer-owned solar from the beginning. They've had a couple of some changes. They've had some various analyses of their rate structure. They've increased their monthly fixed charge for sure, which is something that you can do when you're looking at trying to absolutely avoid any cross subsidization. But so it's been an interesting utility. They've been very open to dialogue about everything. We don't always agree on everything, but it's helpful. It's good to have a relationship with a consumer-owned utility like that. More recently, I've been exchanging some ideas with Brian around data centers. He's mostly been really supportive of some of the things all of us are talking about: high transparency, curtailment, resource use and analysis and studies. Of course, what they're looking at within Dairyland's system, especially within the local co-ops, are relatively small scale data centers. So Harmony, Minnesota is not a hyperscaler site location. It's something much more modest. But coming out of some of that exchange, I asked him, hey, would you be willing to face our network group and maybe some tough questions and talk about what you're thinking, how you're thinking about this in Harmony? Because they're really honing in on a very real opportunity. And he said yes. And so, I'll introduce him again next time, but just putting that bug in her ear, I'm looking forward to hearing his conversation and to some of us challenging him maybe with questions respectfully, but also really thankful that he's willing to come and talk to us. I think generally consumer-owned utilities are have always thought a very different animal than investor-owned utilities, certainly in who they ought to be responsible to. It doesn't always work that way as much as we would wish, but typically speaking, they are responsible to their members, owners, local customers. And so, this is an example of a situation like that. Now, for the co-ops, they're members of their GenCos, in this case, Dairyland. So the Dairylands of the world, including the other ones that serve other co-ops and municipals, don't always have exactly the same incentives and motivations as the local distribution utilities either. So that might be something interesting to hear and learn a little bit more about. But that's what we've got coming up. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Brian and having that conversation in a couple of weeks. Note, he's not available at this 3 o'clock time period. So Christine, it's at noon hour. Is that right?
Yes, it's at 12 Central. You'll see that in the invitation reminder that will go out, and the link you use to get in here will work. That time period has been changed for that session. And I also wanted to note that all of these, or at least these three, are being recorded and also uploaded to CEDI's resource hub. And I'll include with the video on YouTube the links to everything that appears here in the chat. So some of these resources and further reading that we might not have had time to open.
All right. Well, I think with that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks, everybody, for your participation again in this second webinar. And thanks again to you, John, for presenting today.
Thanks, John.
Take care, everyone. Cheers.